Hey guys, how we doing today? I want to talk to you today about something that I'm calling the Checkmate Moment. In 1974, those of you that are old enough to remember, probably the most famous boxing match that's ever taken place took place between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Came to be known as the Rumble in the Jungle. And in that fight, Muhammad Ali employed a tactic that had never been seen before in the sport of boxing, but has since become the stuff of legend, known as the RopeADope. And what the RopeADope basically was that Muhammad Ali, as they went through this fight, Foreman was the heavy hitter. He was a bruising, punishing, physical hitter. And so Muhammad Ali showed up with a strategy to basically make himself look as if he was locked against the ropes. And so he would actually back himself into the ropes and stop moving, which conventional wisdom would tell you that as a boxer, when you stop moving, you're dead in the water. And he would put himself in this vulnerable position. He would lean up against the ropes, and Foreman would just obliterate him, just swing away, swing away, swing away. And Foreman, looking at this as a window of what he recognized from his conventional training as the time to take the kill shot, was just absolutely releasing, just unloading, just emptying his clip. And all the while, what Foreman didn't realize is that Ali was doing this on purpose, and that he had literally developed this tactic that was allowing him to take these blows on his hands and on his arms. And none of the blows, if you went back and watched the tape, were actually ever square. They were hitting him in the hands and the arms, and he was leaned against the ropes, so the ropes were actually absorbing most of the energy instead of his body. And what began to happen is, while Foreman thought that he had Ali exactly where he wanted him, what was actually happening is that Ali was very, very craftily wearing Foreman out and waiting for the exact right moment to strike. And when that moment presented itself, strike he did. And again, it became one of the most famous boxing matches and famous strategies ever employed. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, guys, tonight, because that's how God works as well. God is very, very strategic in the way that he moves. And one of the things I've learned is that he is willing to spend years and years and years setting the stage for a checkmate moment. And sometimes when you're in the middle of that setting up process, that preparation process, it's very easy to feel like God's not being faithful. It's very easy to feel like the promises are never going to come. It's very easy to become discouraged and lose sight, simply because our concept of time and the scale that we perceive time on is so much different than his. We could go story for story for story throughout the Bible, and if you were to do that, you would start to uncover a footprint or a pattern in the strategy of how God works. And just to throw a couple at you, I think of, Joshua at Jericho, where God's got them just walking around the wall, day after day, just taking ridicule and having stuff thrown on them and being heaped on them. And that every day there was this kind of mental battle about, God, this feels so silly. It feels so ridiculous. I mean, we know that we think this is what God said, and I feel like this, we believe that we're being faithful, we're doing what we're supposed to do, but this feels like it is absolutely futile. It feels like it's absolutely pointless. This feels like the most ridiculous thing, and I don't see any traction. I don't see any difference from today compared to yesterday, compared to the day before that. And so that there's this mental mind game that's going on, and yet we, as having the benefit of hindsight, know what God was doing. He was setting the stage for his checkmate moment when the walls all came crumbling down. And in that moment, it all made sense. But even for those who are seasoned saints, when you're in the setup process, the checkmate moment, even though you know how God works, the checkmate moment, there's always this struggling match, whether or not you're going to trust that the checkmate moment is coming. Another perfect example would be David and Goliath. The Philistines this war was going on, and Israel was taking blow after blow, losing battle after battle, and it all came to a head in this one, big match, ultimate battle royale, winner takes all moment. And here Goliath is hurling all of these insults and all of this, and he's shaming the people of God, and he's saying, where is your God? Basically, all of the conversations that we have in our own mind when we are trying to stand on the promise and believe that God is up to something. And yet here Goliath is as the mouthpiece, and he's literally saying these things. And all of the time, that the kings and with Saul and all the people in the nation were sitting there going, how are we ever going to... we feel like God's called us out into this situation. We believe God has us, but there's just no way that this can be God's plan. There's just no way. This is not what we heard. This is not what God spoke. This is not what we've been believing and standing on. This does not line up with the vision. This isn't right. This is not the way this is supposed to go. And so there's this internal struggle going on. But yet, once again, we have the benefit of hindsight being 2020, and we know that all of this was setting the stage for this crescendo moment, this checkmate moment, where in an instant, with one rock, God completely came in and delivered all of the promises, all of the results, and delivered the enemies in one instant. And so, for whatever reason, that's God seems to be the way that as we study how God has moved throughout the generations and throughout the ages, we learn that God has a flair for the dramatic. And I guess that makes sense because we talk about life being analogous with story, and God is the original storyteller. And so one thing we know about God, even if you look at Jesus and the way he taught, was through story. There's something about story that's very, very powerful. It's woven into the fiber of our being. And God is a very dramatic storyteller. And so as you read through the Bible, time after time after time, you find case after case of these dramatic stories with these dramatic checkmate punchline moments. And of course, the ultimate example of that would be Jesus. And as he is arrested in the Garden of the Gethsemane and he begins to go before Pontius Pilate, and the disciples, even after everything they've seen, they find themselves in that pre-checkmate moment doubt, right? That we all experience. None of us are immune to it, where it's like, this isn't right. Something's not right. I know we've been with him and he's been promising, and we've had all these, mountaintop moments of what's going to come in the kingdom and all these promises and things that we understand and believe, but something just doesn't feel right. This can't be right. This can't be right. And they struggled with trust. That doubt was just washing over them in that interim period where the table was being set. They were battling with all those same things that we battle in their internal dialogue. We know the story, even Peter, who couldn't believe just moments earlier that he could ever possibly deny Christ. Time after time after time denied Jesus because of that doubt that was going on. And yet, once again, we know how the story ends. The ultimate dramatic punchline, the checkmate moment of all checkmate moments, where all of the hordes of hell had come out and were there to see and observe and celebrate the ultimate victory. And yet, in his masterful strategy, in his RopeADope moment, Jesus had set the stage. Father God was setting the stage for the ultimate checkmate moment. And so I just want to remind you today, guys, that that's the way God works in our lives. And as we talk about going into this season and going into all the things we say that we believe God's promising, and he's doing a new thing and in the work with us and with High Point, and we've talked about the transitions and the opportunities in this season, and that God is bringing a new awakening to the planet, you have to understand, if that's how he has told his story and that's how he has set his stage for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, who are we to think that it's going to be any different? There are going to be moments where we have to step back and understand and trust that God is setting the table for a dramatic checkmate moment. One of my other favorite examples of this type of checkmate moment took place in 1795 during the French Revolutionary War. And during this time, there were a bunch of Dutch warships that began to descend upon a harbor known as Den Helder in the Netherlands. And the French people that were holding that territory, as these ships began to move in, they began to move in very carefully because they were exposed as they came into the harbor. And so, but they knew that if they could get the whole fleet into the harbor, that they would overwhelm the French forces there, and they would be able to take this beachhead, this strategic point in the war. And so as they began to come in, they were surprised to find that there was no opposition from the French. And they began to become encouraged, and they began to call forth more and more and more of their ships, until slowly they had been able to move their entire fleet into this position, this kill shot position in the harbor. And they couldn't believe it, but they just knew that if they could get their whole fleet into this harbor, that the war would be won. And so any neutral observer would say, what are the French doing? They've got to be crazy. Surely they understand that if they let all of these ships make their way into that harbor, their only hope is to choke them off at the pinch point coming into the harbor. Because if all the ships in the Dutch fleet get into the harbor, it's over. It's curtains. And just like that moment where Muhammad Ali was taking those blows against the ropes, and all of his fans and all the onlookers and all the conventional wisdom said, what is he doing? This is crazy. I mean, he's got to know better than this, right? Well, sure enough, the French had something up their sleeve. And what the Dutch did not know is that at that time in the winter, at that particular season, that harbor was known for having flash freezes. And the waters in that harbor were stable and ambient right at the freezing point. And so that it was very, very commonplace for a single cold front to come in and that harbor would freeze over literally overnight, almost as if in an instant. And so the French knew it was just a matter of time to lure those ships in. And sure enough, a freeze came through, the entire harbor froze over, and the entire Dutch fleet was literally immobilized, sitting ducks. And the French were able to actually take their cavalry and ride out on the ice and completely obliterate the entire Dutch Navy in a single swoop. And it became the turning point in that war. And so I just think there's something that we need to borrow from those stories, guys, about the strategy of God. We have to understand that He is a master storyteller. And whether it's what we're going through as a corporate group, whether it's what you're going through in your personal life, the promises that you've stood on, the things that you feel like God has spoken, the words that you've held to and cling to. Listen, if you're in a situation right now where you look around at your circumstances and things that are going on and you're just going, this can't be right. This doesn't line up. This can't be right. This doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. You're probably in a really good place, because that's a perfect fit for the MO, the blueprint, everything we know about how God likes to work. He's a master tactician, and He has an incredible flair for the dramatic. And the reason why is because there's nothing more memorable, there's nothing more persuasive than a dramatic checkmate moment. And God loves to get His glory in those kinds of moments, because those are the kinds of moments, the stuff from which legends are made, the stories that get passed on from generation to generation and that get told from person to person that impact and influence and change lives. Those stories are birthed almost always out of a checkmate moment. But you don't get a checkmate moment without a proper setting of the stage. So remember this, when you look around at your situation today, your financial situation, whatever it is, understand that God's not playing checkers. It may look like the board is not going the way it's supposed to be. And it may look like the checkers are not setting up where they should be. And things don't make sense and don't feel right. But remember that God is playing chess. And He has got a checkmate moment up His sleeve. It's funny that sometimes it's easier for us to trust God with our eternity than it is to trust Him with our next paycheck. Isn't that funny? Because that big trust word, and the reason is we have such a tendency to want to look at and evaluate the setup and the circumstance and the recipe of what's going on around us and use that information to make calculations about how probable we think it is that the promises of God are going to come true. And we have to understand that's not how God works. He's a master tactician, and He has a flair for the dramatic. And so in the moment where everything looks like it's not going the way that it's supposed to, I'm telling you prophetically in the Spirit, guys, I feel that we are literally on the cusp of a massive checkmate moment. And our job is to simply stand in there and trust and believe, because checkmate is coming. Love you guys.